mate. Thank you.
And that closing the gap statement with the Prime Minister in about 10 minutes now. And with me ahead of that, we've got the Shadow Communications Minister, Jason Clare. Before we get into a few of the other political issues, this one, it's good to see, does have a bipartisanship about it at the moment. And certainly Prime Minister Abbott embracing the idea of the annual Closing the Gap update.
Yeah, well, you'll remember that Kevin Rudd, after he apologised to the stolen generations, initiated this process to hold us to account every year to make sure that we identify the gaps and make sure that we close them. We live in a country at the moment where the colour of your skin affects the age that you die, your chances of dying when you're young, and your chances of finishing school, amongst a number of other things. And that's not good enough. We've got to close those gaps. That's what this work is all about. We invested a lot of time, effort and money in this, and there's a lot of work to go. Hopefully what we'll see today is the Prime Minister building on that work.
And it needs bipartisanship, doesn't it? I suppose, you know, when you're talking about the practical elements of health, education, mortality rates, that's one thing, but also overarching all of that is the reconciliation process as well, and recognition in the Constitution. All of that needs a bipartisanship, doesn't it?
If both parties don't work together, it won't work. It won't happen. We won't be able to make the changes that are needed to the Constitution. We won't be able to close the gap. And so the Prime Minister has our support. We need to work together if we're going to fix this god-awful problem.
With onto the political issues now, and the government says that, well, the reports in the Financial Review, Phil Curry reporting that Toyota told the government that a key impediment was workplace conditions. Is the company just being polite publicly by not mentioning that and not giving that greater focus?
Well, first, there's two things I'd say. First is, I think it's appalling that 2 days after 2,500 people get told that they're losing their job, that the government uses a newspaper to say it's your fault. You're the reason that you're losing your job. The second is it's wrong. If you have a look at the newspaper, Toyota say the decision was not motivated by a single factor. Further into the newspaper, the Premier of Victoria, the Liberal Premier of Victoria, Dennis Napthine, says the same thing. So last week we had Tony Abbott attacking the workers at SPC, saying you're the reason that we've got a problem at SPC. Sharman Stone came out and said Tony Abbott was a liar. What this shows is they've learnt nothing from that, because a week goes by and now they're attacking another set of workers and saying you're losing your job because it's your fault.
But aren't you selectively quoting though, because the company has taken the union to court over this? They wanted some, I think it was nearly 30 conditions either gone or changed significantly. That court process hadn't even been concluded. Okay. So obviously this was a big issue for Toyota.
Well, Kieran, I'm just quoting what the company's saying. Let me quote what Dennis Napthine said. Dennis Napthine disputed the singling out of industrial relation arrangements at its factories. What you got here is a government desperate to point the finger at somebody else, to blame workers. There's an old saying that the job doesn't make the man, it reveals him. And what we're seeing here is what Tony Abbott is really like. He gets into trouble and he attacks workers. He attacked workers at SPC last week, and now he's blaming the workers.
Well, they're saying there's a difference there between the union bosses and the workers. They haven't been attacking the workers.
Well, they're saying they got paid too much. You got paid too much, so you all got to get the sack. And I think that's not good enough. You know, this is not the first time Tony Abbott's done this.
But it's about the union bargaining. It's not the workers concerned. They've shown complete respect for them, saying they feel for them and that they help them in transitions.
Kieran, you can do a lot more than feel for the workers. You can fight for them. You can get in there, talk to the companies, talk to Holden, have a crack, talk to Toyota and say, what can we do to keep these jobs and keep these skills in Australia?
Has the whole impact been overstated though? Because the car distribution, the service sector, it's much greater. I asked this of Richard Miles and Jamie Briggs a bit earlier, but it's a valid point, isn't it? That the industry is much, much greater than the manufacturing. It's only a fraction of it. As sad as it is for the workers affected, of course it's tragic, but you know, in terms of the impact on the economy, has that been overstated with mentions of recession and so on?
Oh, well, the point Richard made, and I'd reinforce it, is the capability that you lose, the skills in the Australian workforce that can be used for other industries. When I was Defence Material Minister, I saw car component companies that are now producing components for the Joint Strike Fighter, the new fighter plane that Australia is purchasing off the United States. They're building components in Australia for fighter planes being built in the United States. Now, if you don't have these skills and capabilities, not just at Toyota, but in the component companies, then you lose the chance at advanced manufacturing of other products like fighter planes. They're the sorts of skills we're going to lose because this government has sat on its hands, done nothing. Now the car industry...
Should tariffs go completely now?
Well, that's a question for the Prime Minister to consider. I know that we've got the Japanese free trade agreement that's coming to a conclusion. You and I talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, where that is apparently on the table. We'll see what comes of that in the middle of the year when that free trade agreement is apparently signed.
But surely if we don't have a local industry to protect, the tariffs should go and taxpayers will save $1,000. I think it's about $1,000 for a small size vehicle like a Corolla or a Mazda 3, something like that.
Well, again, it's a decision for the government to make, and a decision about timing as well, because you've still got the car industry here for another couple of years. You don't want to have them go out of the country even sooner than they already are. Let's not make this problem any worse than it already is. The car industry is now going to die in a couple of years because the government's done nothing.
Jason, Clare, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Well, quick